All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome. Excited to see you here. My name is Steve Haase. I'm the Chief Customer Officer at Yada, and I'm really excited to be presenting today the CEO of Yada and the CEO of StayFi for a exciting conversation, tight and focused, 30 minutes today, including Q&A at the end. So write down your questions. You can put them in the chat. We're going to get to them all at the end, maybe even during. So please share those questions in the chat here. Turn past guests into repeat bookings. So we're going to talk about how these two technologies work together to help you grow your short-term rental business and turn that database of uncontacted folks into repeat bookings. So we're going to have a good time today. We're going to go into the details of both of these products, as well as examples, case studies, stories of operators who have used them to great effect. A couple of housekeeping items before we keep going. We are recording. Put those questions in the Q&A. I will be looking at the chat. In fact, why don't you let us know where you are calling in from? Where are you based? Go ahead and put that in the comments and we'll be able to see that. And with that, let's start with some intros. Actually, we have an agenda here. Intros, we're going to talk about the different companies, how they work together, show you the product in action, talk about some best practices, and then Q&A. We've got a fellow Canadian here. Hello, Lex. I'm in Southern Ontario, but we have Peter in, you're in Miami, aren't you? And Arthur is in NYC, so calling in from around the world here. And with that, let's do some intros. Arthur, over to you.
Hey everyone, my name is Arthur Kolker, and I am the founder and CEO of StayFi, and super excited to be here and partnering with Yada.
We're here at Yada, super excited to be working with StayFi, super excited to have everybody on the webinar today, and super excited to show you all the cool ways that we can work together between StayFi and Yada to drive more direct bookings, get people coming back and filling up empty weekends, and ideally reducing some of that reliance on Airbnb. So Arthur, could you tell us a little bit about StayFi?
Yeah, for sure. So you can think about StayFi as a marketing solution that most importantly helps you collect data from all your guests, not just the booker, which is so important in vacation rentals, because with vacation rentals, as you guys know, often you have many adults staying in your properties at the same time. And we want to be able to market your brand to not just the booker, but everyone there. And the objective of StayFi is really to make sure that while everybody may have come to your listing thinking you are a quote unquote Airbnb, they're all going to leave knowing your brand name and why they should book direct again in the future. And really the core of our product is Wi-Fi based data collection. So a very similar experience to how you log into the Wi-Fi at a coffee shop or a hotel or an airport. When the guests join the Wi-Fi network, they will see a captive portal. And if we go to the next slide, I believe it is later.
A little bit further down.
We'll show you guys later. But essentially, we can collect data from not just the booker, everybody there. And then we help you also market to all of your guests to make sure that they know who you are and why they should come back. And then, of course, there are some really awesome additional Wi-Fi related features that we offer as well. Things like occupancy alerting, so connecting with your software and knowing not just if there's too many guests there, but if there are too many guests compared to the actual current booking, as well as making sure all your guests have great connectivity in your rental properties.
Thank you for saying that, man. That's awesome. You know, just thinking about like how critical it is when you think about most Airbnb properties having multiple bedrooms, like 2, 3, 4, in some cases more bedrooms, and having, 5, 6, or 7 guests, being able to turn one email address and one phone number into 5, 6, or 7 is so critical. For us, Yada, our background is primarily CRM and sales enablement. So our whole team comes from companies like HubSpot, Shopify, and Zoom Info. We came into the short-term rental space really with this mission of bringing customer relationship management sophistication that exists in a lot of other spaces and a lot of other verticals to the short-term rental and to the hospitality space. and really working with all of that data that you get from places like StayFi and activating it in a very direct, very actionable and very sophisticated way. And we do that by really working on building and helping activate this direct booking flywheel, where we like to look at guests and reservations not just as a transaction between you, a property manager, and a guest, but as a part of an ongoing journey where you initially attract somebody to your property through a website or through Airbnb. You convert them, you start building a relationship with them, really drive an amazing experience while they're at your property and while they're on their vacation, and then driving a lot of the post-stay messaging, re-engagement, remarketing, ad campaigns, like all of this type of stuff that's going to get somebody coming back to your website, back to your property, booking directly, and building a relationship with you that isn't just a one and done, they came, they stayed, they left, but something that lasts for years and years and years and results in a significantly higher number of direct bookings and repeat bookings. I think what we're noticing over the last couple of years, and it's becoming very, very evident with various pricing changes and policy changes that Airbnb has, is that Airbnb isn't necessarily your friend. Airbnb is very focused on building their brand. So they don't really care about helping you fill your gap nights. They don't really care about helping you fill your calendar as much as possible. They mostly care about having as many people as possible book through Airbnb. And in doing so, they really, the pricing is quite punitive towards hosts, and the policies that make it very difficult for you as a host to get contact info, to get in touch directly with guests is something that really goes against the mission that everybody has, which is to drive as much occupancy as possible, minimize the possibility of weekends sitting empty and nights sitting empty when they could have otherwise been filled. And really just what Airbnb is trying to do is drive people towards Airbnb. But what we as property managers really want is to make sure that every time that we have an empty night on our calendar, we have the possibility and we have the technology and the tools needed to do something about it. So instead of waiting for somebody to pick us off the shelf on a marketplace like Airbnb, in an ideal world, we're really looking at that data that we have, and we're using that contact info that we have and all the channels that we have to communicate with the guest to get them to come back and to get them to fill those empty nights on the calendar. And Airbnb recently raised their fees, and we get a lot of questions of what happens if that 15.5% fee goes up. What if they are even more stringent in how they show our property on their front page or how they rank our property in their search engine? And the answer to this question is, like every other market that exists in the world and every other industry, if you can control even a percentage of your own growth and a percentage of your own direct revenue, you have a lot of power to influence and to kind of work around this reliance on marketplaces and on OTAs for the entirety of your revenue. So there's no way to get around and like completely avoid OTAs completely, but if you can do everything in your power to help drive direct revenue, help action those empty nights that exist on your calendar, you're in a much, much, much better place than you would have otherwise been. And that's how we do it. We use StayFi and Yada together to collect contact info, add guest data to the guest database, associate additional guests that stayed at a property. So not just the person that booked, but everybody else that was there at the party. And then using CRM tools, whether it's StayFi or with the Yada done for you marketing campaigns in CRM, to turn all of that data into repeat bookings, into extra nights, into social proof, and into any sort of signal that would either directly cause somebody to book again or make sure that you're top of mind the next time somebody is looking at a property and expressing some sort of booking or buying intent. And with that, we have this seamless guest capture of guest data, and then the post-stay marketing. So when somebody arrives, we start with one person who booked. Within an hour of arrival, we might have 8 extra phone numbers and emails. We sync that guest data with Yada through CSV or Zapier or direct API connection very shortly. And then immediately we can start powering some really, really really sophisticated automated campaigns. So segmenting people by how much they spent, when they stayed, what kind of customer persona they have, and then immediately from the moment they arrive and start booking, turning those people into very, very probable rebookers in the future.
I have a quick question before we dive into the product. I'd love to hear in the comments what this would do for your business to be able to bring in this contact information, remarket to them in a way that would drive direct bookings. We'll pass it over to Arthur to continue going, but I'd love to hear from you in the comments. We'll share that on the screen here.
Yeah, so let's take a step ahead and we can look at the StayFi product itself. So just going into a little more detail about the power of Wi-Fi marketing is, number one, it really creates a branded touch point with all of your guests. So like we talked about before, when people are booking on an OTA like Airbnb or Vrbo, we know that it's pretty common language for guests to say they booked an Airbnb. So it's going to take many branded touch points over the course of the stay, and then of course after the stay, to start solidifying in the guest's mind that you are not just an Airbnb, but that you are your own business with your own direct booking site. And then of course, during that process, we also need to articulate the value proposition about why booking direct is better for both you and the guest, obviously. And for most operators, price point is the one they lean on the most, because with that 15.5% commission, you typically can split that commission between you and the guest so that both sides are better off with a direct transaction. So in all of these points at the splash page, and then we have a page after the splash page we call the home page, which is really just a place where guests can see all of the essential links to your property. And all of these different touch points, you can reinforce in the guest's mind your brand name, and then of course why they should be booking directly with you for future stays. And then on the splash page, importantly, we do not just collect first, last name, and email. We also collect phone numbers, and that's become even more important lately because Airbnb recently cut off your ability to access guest or booker phone numbers, and they're using proxy kind of phone numbers, just like how they use proxy emails. And I would anticipate that in the future, we may see more and more restrictions on the ability to collect data through Airbnb or Vrbo. So right now, a lot of people, let's say they want to collect the booker's email or phone number, they're sending forms through links in OTAs for guests to fill out. It's very much possible in the future that even those types of forms may become restricted. So StayFi provides a compliant way that's compliant with Airbnb's terms, as well as having guests opt into marketing. So that we can collect data, but we're also not relying on any OTA system to collect that data. So you're not cut off from any data source in the future. And then, of course, we're always going to collect a lot more data than those alternatives because we're not just touching the guests, we're touching everybody there. And then the other thing is on this homepage, we give you a ton of flexibility in terms of the links that you can go out to. So no matter what type of guest portal you're using, upsell platform, anything like that, we let you link to those third-party tools so that every single guest, not just the booker, gets that important upsell and guidebook, let's say, information. Because again, often we've shared those things with the booker, but we cannot reliably guarantee that that booker is going to share information to everybody that stays in the listing. So it's very powerful after the guests log in to text, to email them, now that we have their data, the guidebook for this property, the upsell information for this property, because that also will reduce guest questions and will increase upsells because now we're going beyond the booker and we're sharing that information with all the non-booking guests who've probably never communicated with you yet. So you can really think of StayFi as that wedge that's going to open up your ability to market not just to the booker, but the entire party. And that's going to increase conversion rates on upsells, increase your ability to send them valuable property information and decrease questions, and really just make the experience better for everybody there because you're able to communicate things to the entire guest party.
That's awesome. And you guys are really, really successful at it. So we'd love to hear a little bit about one of these case studies and what you guys did for Juniper Holiday Homes.
Yeah, so I mean, we work with property managers and also owner operators of all size. So we see people with one listing collect data and become more successful at direct bookings, or someone like Juniper who maybe started with around 30 or 40 properties when they started working with StayFi. Now they have probably over 100 in their portfolio. So they're definitely a growing property manager. And like many newer property managers, really had very few direct bookings when they started working with us. So right away, obviously, we 10x'd or more their guest data collection. So over 11,000 emails in just a year. And in that 1 year, we drove almost 250 direct bookings. And I think the one thing to obviously those direct bookings produce way, way, way more revenue and profit than the cost of our StayFi system. But I think more importantly than that, I think a lot of times we think in terms of just cannibalization. So, we're going to get a direct booking instead of an Airbnb booking, and then we're going to save that 15.5%, but it could be less than that if you're splitting that savings with guests. But really the power of marketing to your own database is that you're going to drive more bookings and you're going to fill nights that otherwise would have not been filled. So I think it's important to remember that when you get a direct booking, it's not just replacing an Airbnb booking. It could be a booking for nights that never would have been filled before. Especially true if you have kind of shoulder seasons that aren't as booked. You can really market those to your growing audience. And that way you're filling nights that either would have gone unbooked, or with many of these different pricing softwares that people are using, they typically cut prices pretty substantially as dates are approaching. So maybe you would have also sold those nights on an OTA, but at a much lower rate, right? So we're getting more direct bookings further out, and we're raising your overall occupancy, which is going to increase both your profitability and revenue, but also keep homeowners, if you are a PM, stickier and happier with you, because you're going to outperform your property management competitors when you have a robust book direct strategy. Yeah. And then, of course, they were also just really happy that they could monitor and control and understand what was happening internet-wise in all of their properties, which, as we know, is a very important guest amenity.
I think that's such a key thing, is this focus on expanding the slice or the size of the pie itself, as opposed to redistributing where the slices of the pie are located. And I think that's something that many other industries intuitively understand, that it's so valuable. In fact, much more valuable just to increase the size or the amount of revenue that you're getting, as opposed to changing the sources of where that revenue is coming from. And stuff like this really goes a pretty long way to do that. This is an example of the landing pages that you were talking about before, with the guidebooks, the websites, the upsells, et cetera, integrated onto those landing pages, correct?
Yeah. So, I mean, when we think about upsells, there's really two categories, and people can use a lot of different types of tools to accomplish this. But there are services and offerings that you are providing, and obviously those are typically the much higher margin ones. Examples of that would be things like early check-in, late checkout, mid-stay cleans. Some people even sell like goods like firewood or other like kits in the home, so that's a little more rare, or like kayak rentals, right? So we have one partner, the Hostco, although which is free, but of course you can use any tool that you would like. And that way we just make it easier to sell these types of things to your guests. And even things like early check-in, right? Like you can send these home pages in advance of the stay as well through your property management software. So it's just a great way to make sure that not just the booker, but everyone is seeing these. And then the other types of upsells where people are making revenue are kind of more affiliate style programs. So we partner with Viator, which is the largest tour and activity marketplace in the world, where you will get an 8% commission. Also, the Hostco, our partner, has a ton of affiliate programs. We see customers that use things like Minoan, even, where there are certain goods in the home where you can scan a QR code, and then if you sell those, you get a commission, right? So there are all sorts of ways to make revenue with upsells, whether they are your own services or third-party services where you're just getting a commission. And we just make, either you can use Viator and the Hostco if you are doing this already, or if you already have a service like this in your property management software or with another third-party tool, we just extend your ability to allow more guests to
expanding the surface of where the guests can interact with that product.
Yeah.
That's awesome. At Yada, we do something a little bit similar to that, but a little bit of a different approach. Our platform is essentially a customer relationship management platform. So what we do is we have a very significant degree of sophistication, pulling in all of this guest data from the property management system, from Wi-Fi, from captive portal, et cetera, to drive these incredibly targeted campaigns to past guests who've stayed at your property. So really just focusing on hitting the right person with the right message at the right time with the right offer. But and I know that sounds like a lot, but essentially what our system does is it takes a look at all of your existing guest data, the past reservations, the past conversations, and any sort of associated contact that you have. And it says, okay, this person stayed in Arizona 6 months ago or a year ago. It's coming up to their 6-month anniversary, and they typically booked like 2 to 3 weeks before arrival. So we'll put together a quick campaign around that, send it to the subset of contacts and the subset of guests that most accurately represent that segment and that persona, and then try to drive as much direct bookings as possible through that campaign. So this was for Home Team a few weeks ago. I think they got started with us about 4 or 5 weeks ago, and we already drove about $36,000 in direct bookings for them through one campaign. The parameters here were basically, we looked at everybody who stayed in Arizona in the last 6 months. We found about 400 or 500 people who stayed at a subset of their properties during a certain time frame, and then sent them an opportunity or sent them an offer for those same properties for a certain number of weekends this winter that would not have otherwise been booked. So what we did for Home Team is we took all of that guest data that they already have, that guest data that they'd collected previously, built the perfect segment and the most accurate possible segment for a subset of their properties that were not performing as well, and expanded the size of the pie by $35,000 or $34,300 within about a week and a half. And that's really the power of direct marketing. Again, as Arthur said earlier, not cannibalizing bookings from Airbnb to something like direct, but rather expanding the slice of the pie so that every single one of those empty weekends that you have, especially if they're like holiday weekends or weekends where you really feel like they should be booked, actioning the hell out of that so that you know that you've done everything possible with Yada, with StayFi, to turn those empty weekends into something that has revenue. It's not always going to work, but even if it works 10, 15, 20% of the time, that's essentially free money, free bookings, free revenue for properties and for rooms and for weekends that are already there, that are sitting empty, and that are just waiting to have the right message sent to the right guest at the right time to get them to book. And we have a ton of these case studies. This is an example of one where totally there was about 2,700 recipients. We reached about 2,717. So there's only about 40 or 50 people that we weren't able to reach via SMS. These about 200 people clicked the link to follow up and go to the direct booking site and use that offer. And this was all done for you. So for Home Team, when they signed up with Yada and when they start using Yada, they basically say, all right, here's what our brand language sounds like. This is what we want to talk about. These are the properties that we want to highlight and really drive direct bookings for. And then we take it from there. And then we work with the property managers to understand the analytics, provide suggestions for how to further increase calendar occupancy and things like that. And then also kind of take the marketing, like all of the marketing lift off of their hands. And every single time drive results like this, where we'll send out 3,000 messages, 2,900 will hit the right inbox, 10 or 15% of those will click on a link. And then even if a couple of percentage points of those book every single time, week after week, month after month, year after year, the aggregate of that is incredibly powerful. And the really cool thing is that it's all done for you. So if you're using something like StayFi and Yada and combining these two systems, and you're like, all right, I want to get started with marketing, it's super straightforward. We just learn a little bit about the brand and start getting these campaigns out the door very, very quickly with a very, very high degree of success. And then the really cool thing is that we also integrate with systems that a lot of folks are already using. So a lot of people already use Quo, which used to be OpenPhone, but it's now called Quo, for text and voice and customer support and things like that. So we integrate with phone lines that you already have, so that when you're reaching guests and talking to guests, they already, there's a very, very high chance that they'll already know what number the message is coming from. They might have interacted with you previously on OpenPhone or Quo. So it's just a really cool way to close the loop and make sure that the messaging and the content that they're getting comes from systems that they're already familiar with. And then if you're not on Quo or OpenPhone or anything like that, we can definitely work with that as well. But the cool thing is we get this question a lot, is like, do you integrate with Quo and OpenPhone to drive those direct messages? And the answer to that is absolutely yes. And then we always like to, start wrapping up these webinars and these events with, the question of like, what do you do when a guest says yes? Like often, you might send out, like we saw with Home Team, 2,500 messages, 200 people said yes. And then, our system will automatically send things like codes and the, the most relevant link for them to click to hit that direct booking site and pre-fill it with the dates and the number of guests and things like that. And the really, really cool thing is that, it's not just a blast to many and then, hope it lands. Like there's a very significant amount of follow-up that automatically happens to make sure that every time somebody expresses interest in rebooking or grabbing an extra night or a weekend or anything like that, our system and our team is on top of it, making sure that probability of that person who said yes and interested actually going to a direct booking site and clicking checkout is as high as possible. So we always like to close these things out or towards the end by saying it's super nice to be able to be on top of this stuff. And when somebody says they're interested in booking, know that our system and our team is going to, go to hell and back to make sure that, they have the highest possible probability of actually completing that booking. And then we have some really cool offers for you guys. So we'll kick off the Q&A over here. But if you want to scan these QR codes, both our systems, us and StayFi, have promo offers for everyone who attended the webinar today. And then we can open it up for Q&A. So does anybody have any questions around how StayFi works, how Yada works, how the two systems integrate together, and where to get started with direct marketing and marketing to past guests to fill calendars and drive more direct bookings and expand that pie? Steve, I can't really see the screen, so I'm kind of counting on you to read those out as they come in.
Absolutely. We're just getting some questions from the audience. I guess to start, I'm curious to know, Arthur, when somebody starts with StayFi, how big of a lift is it to get the units into the house? Like, how do you go from not having StayFi to having StayFi? What's that like for an owner?
Yeah, so there is a hardware component when we're working with Wi-Fi, and we sell primarily two types of devices. The first is actually our own proprietary hardware called StayFi Express. StayFi Express is when you already have a mesh system in your home or the property that you manage. So if you can think of like an Amazon Eero mesh system or a TP-Link Deco mesh system, that device will plug into that system and basically add the captive portal to it. The other option we have is we sell you a device called an access point, and that will plug into your internet service provider's router. And then that will also broadcast the captive portal. So when you go and buy hardware from our website, we just have a process where we indicate which device you need based on the details of your property, whether you're going to take your existing system and add StayFi, or you'll buy this access point that will plug into your router. And then we can support that anywhere around the world. So you just go to StayFi, and if you have questions about what to buy, you can always just book a demo with our team, and then we will let you know for your property which exact devices you need to set up StayFi.
Oh, Peter, you said you can't see the
No, I can just see the
presentation. I pinned it there for you. I pinned it. So Tom has a question. He's asking, does Yada work well outside the US for SMS? And it's okay that you joined late. Thanks for joining us, Tom.
It does. That's a really great question. We have email, and we're rolling out WhatsApp in the next week or so as well. So outside of the US, we have a couple of pilot users that we're seeing a lot of success with on WhatsApp for Business. So as long as you have a WhatsApp for Business account, we should be able to work outside of the US in a very, very short amount of time. SMS, like pure SMS itself, is primarily US and Canada, which is fine because outside of the US, like nobody really uses SMS anymore per se. They primarily use WhatsApp, and WhatsApp for Business is a really, really great platform to do that type of SMS analog marketing outside of the US. and it's a little bit less restrictive than SMS. So in fact, it's a little bit of a benefit to be on WhatsApp compared to SMS. So to answer the question, yes, we do SMS outside of the US.
And Tom replies, thank you, sounds great. WhatsApp is the default here in the UK, so that's perfect. Absolutely, glad to hear it, Tom. That brings us to 12:30. If anybody has any additional questions, feel free to drop them here. We can hang out for a few more minutes. Otherwise, thank you so much for joining us. We've got these special offers here. If you book a demo with StayFi, you get 50% off for your first 3 months. If you use the code YADA when you buy. And when you book a demo with Yada, you'll get 1 month free for webinar attendees on our marketing product. And yeah, we'd love to hear from you. Love to help you grow in all the ways that we talked about on the webinar here today. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for joining us, everybody.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you, Arthur. Thank you, Peter.
Bye.